Hey there, welcome to the channel. So my name is Vitali. I'm glad you're here, and I has always been something that's fascinated me about the story of Abraham, and specifically to him and Sarah. So when we read, I'm going to pull this up here. We read in Genesis 23. 1, Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in a land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah, to weep for her. So basically, what this is saying is Abraham came to weep for her. And if we read the previous chapter, Genesis 22, in the end, 22 and verse 19 said, So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So if you're following, Abraham and Sarah are not together at the time of her death. And so if you have, gone down this rabbit trail, or if you've ever, heard about this, this is kind of, there's some background information here, and it really sounds like Sarah and Abraham aren't together at the end. And of course, in chapter 22, this is where we get the story of God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And I'll read it just so that you're on the same page with me. So chapter 22 starts with this. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And verse 3 starts with this. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. So pretty straightforward, right? So God tells him, he wakes up the next morning, takes a couple of, servants, a couple of young men who are going to be helping him on this journey, takes the wood, takes Isaac, and they take off to the place where God told them. When you think about it, when you process all this, and when you look at what ends up happening, and of course they end up coming back. So I can only imagine the colorful story that Isaac would tell his mom, right? And so in many ways, it's not a surprise that Sarah ends up living in a different place. In other words, there's a break in their relationship. Now, obviously, the text doesn't tell us that, but there's when you process all that, when you think about it, when you look at it and go, Abraham doesn't go and consult Sarah. He doesn't talk to his wife, and as men, all of you could only imagine that conversation, how that could have gone had he gone to Sarah and said, Hey, Sarah, here's what God's asking of me, and I'm going to go ahead and do this. So he obviously doesn't do that. Now, obviously, it's a different culture that they're living in, but obviously, Isaac is a fulfillment of this long promise to them. And in fact, Sarah at some point gives Abraham her her servant Hagar, and she asks Abraham to basically take her as a concubine and say, okay, maybe we'll have a son this way, and then God fulfills his promise, right? For it takes him a long time, and at the point where neither Abraham nor Sarah is able to have children, and so here's Abraham trusting God and obeying what God told him and going up on the mountain and almost doing, right? He was pretty much right there to go ahead and fulfill what God asked him to do. And God at the last second stops him and provides a sacrifice. And so verse 12 says this, and do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So There's a confirmation there where God is confirming his faith in Abraham and says, "Now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." But as we can see, this costs Abraham, right? Because I mean, again, like think about the context of the conversation. Mom, can you believe this? Like what? Oh my goodness, you should, man, listen to what just happened, right? Because I'm sure Isaac is relieved, right, that nothing happened. But yet, can you just imagine what went through his mind and sharing that conversation? And so when we're reading about the death of Sarah, she is in a different city, and Abraham comes to mourn her after her death. And yeah, it's fascinating to me because I think life is so complicated, right? We're all dealing with things that don't make any sense. It's certainly that request by God of Abraham makes no sense. If Abraham sat there and tried to process logically, wait, you want me to do what? Hold on. Wait, but you had told me, how does that fit into your story, God, right? No, none of that. It says that, verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering, arose and went to the place of which God told them, and he was ready to do what God asked him to do. No questions asked. It's challenging. It's a challenging. That faith to me is very challenging to have that blind faith to go, okay, Lord, and just take the next step. And this is like when you think about James, when James is writing and he's talking about the faith, your faith and works, and talking about your faith should produce works and your life should look different because of your faith. This is what it's talking about, right? This is Abraham not sitting there wringing his hands and trying to figure out the logic and what, well, of course God could do this or so that could happen or whatever. No, none of that happens. He just steps forward and goes ahead, and he's ready to do what God asked him to do. I don't know if he processed in his head how this was going to unfold and play out beyond with his relationship with Sarah, with his relationship with his son Isaac, how this was going to affect those things, right? Because we're all human and we all have a memory. We can all remember what took place. So I'd love to hear from you if any of you have done any more studying on this and what your thoughts are and how do you process this. It's a challenge to me in the faith aspect to trust God and move forward, not in word but in deed, like just moving forward. Because when you look at when the nation of Israel, when they left Egypt and they saw all the signs and wonders, and they get to the Red Sea, and at the Red Sea they get pinned up to the Red Sea, and the pillar of light and everything's there. God is with them, but they see the army of the Egyptians pushing and pressing against them, and they freak out, right? And I think those of us who are able to look into that story, look into the Bible and go, man, why are you afraid? And yet we're all the same. Like the stuff that happens in our lives, because God isn't giving a play-by-play and saying, hey, just watch what I'm going to do, watch what happens next, right? Or give a preview, or just wait, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do the next thing. No, just, do you trust me? And Abraham clearly trusts him and moves forward. And God says, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And so verse 14 says, so Abraham called called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, on this mount of the Lord it shall be provided. So having that trust that God will provide. God will provide the next thing. Even if he did kill his son, which obviously we know that God is not interested in human sacrifice. We don't see that anywhere in the scriptures. But part of this whole story is that there was a real cost. I do think there was a real cost to Abraham in the break of his relationship with Sarah, so that they are no longer together. Again, that isn't explicit in the text in the scriptures, but there's enough background there with what we're kind of picking up on, as well as if you do a little bit of searching on the internet, there is, there is that thought idea that they were not living together after that, and whether that was why, but certainly you can just imagine and think about how that could have played out. Anyway, I'd love to hear some comments and see your thoughts about what you've thought about that story and how it applies to us as we live out our lives in faith before God, right? Not in the ward and saying, "Of course I trust God. God, I know you have the future. You have my future in your hands." But how do we take the next step in our life, trusting God, trusting that God will will provide, will deliver us, will give us what we need, and know that when we trust God, when we step out in faith, there are there is a real cost that sometimes we will pay, and regardless of what that cost is, that that trust is what God is asking us to do, just that we would trust Him. Not that we trust Him because we know He's going to improve our life. Not that we trust Him because every time I sort of step through this kind of a crazy trust exercise, God ratchets me up and gives me more, wisdom, more money, more whatever it is that we think we should have, or we would like. But knowing no matter what, I will trust. Abraham doesn't sit there and try to figure out, well, if I do this, then, no, he just gets up and does it. So I hope this causes you to think a little bit, and I'd love to just have some feedback and see what your thoughts are. All right, well, have a wonderful day. Thank you.